Sup you phonies, how's it going? Welcome to another video. Today we're gonna do a water effect in Blender. I got this question asked a lot, how do I make my water in Blender because it looks so realistic, and today I'm gonna show you my little trick how I make my water, because there's probably hundreds of ways how to make water. Now I'm gonna show you how I make my water. And we're not talking about liquid simulations here, we're just talking about a surface of water you can use for a lake or for an ocean, and even there's lots of different ways to make that. I'm going to talk about a few of those, but mostly I'm going to show you how I make my procedural water inside of Blender. Let's go. So this here is my Blender scene. If you want to set it up the way I have it, I have my asset browser on the top left here. I have my shader editor on my bottom left, and I have my 3D viewport on the bottom right, and my camera view on the top right. We're going to be working a little with animation today too, so make sure to have a timeline too. Anyways, we need water, and my scene usually starts with a camera and a 3D model just for scale reference. Just have something in the background, let's say here in the background, and then we're going to have our water here in the center. So the first thing I do is I hold Shift A to create a mesh, a plane. This is going to be our water surface. Now I scale this up, make sure it reaches until our background guy. If he's too far away, we can also move him closer, but that's good for now. So just scale this up. Now, if you scale something in object mode, you always want to Control A and apply the scale. If you don't do that, it could mess up lots of things. So every time you change a scale, just make it a habit. Just Control A, apply the scale. Just do it always, even if you didn't do anything. Just do it. It's good for you. Now this doesn't look like water at all for multiple reasons. Right now we're just in the viewport for shading, and if you are working in Blender 4.1 I believe or newer, you can display displacement in your viewport also. If not, you have to work in cycles. Now again, there's different ways to make like a water surface. One way I was trying out for the longest using a modifier, the ocean modifier, but I find this is it's just not very intuitive. Like, you can animate the time here, which is fine. Here are the resolution settings. You can crank this up if you want. The depth of the water, the size of the water, you can give it waves if you want. So for like an ocean, it's probably the way to go. Now if I animated this, it would be like an ocean with lots of turbulence and stuff like that. So yes, you could use that, but for like a water surface, what I usually do, I give it a new material in my shader editor, and the node setup is not that complex. What we need is to delete the principled BSDF, and we're gonna make a glass shader instead. If you don't know how to add nodes here, it's the same way like anywhere else in Blender. Shift A and you can add a new node. So now this glass shader, we're gonna link this to the surface. Little tip, you can just hold Control Shift and left click, then it's gonna go to the surface right away, which is very handy sometimes. So that is basically the regular water we would need, but we can make a few adjustments to make it a little more interesting. You could give it a little more roughness if you wanted to, so it reflects the background a little different. And I also recommend, once you start working on it more, finish your background so you can actually see the reflections you get. For example, I'm just going to add a background of, let's say, a sunset, because it's always pretty to see a sunset in the ocean. So I'm just going to go on Google and download an image. Now that I downloaded an image which looks fine, I'm going to go with Shift A, Image, and Mesh Plane. Import my image, and there it is. Now you can see inside this image that it has water in it already, but I don't want to show this water. I just want the horizon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this far back into the background, scale it up. I'm going to bring it low enough that it just cuts off the actual water, like right here. Now you can see that our water, this is our water, is basically a mirror, because it's a glass material, to the background. Okay, so that's basically what we want from this camera perspective. If we change the camera perspective, then obviously it's not going to work anymore. So make sure to keep the camera right on the horizon line. You can push in or push back, but don't go up or down if you go with that method. Now I'm just going to change the material to an emissive material, or let's just plug this in right in. So now you can see this hard line here. We don't want it, so I'm just going to bring this down a little. Now this surface is a perfect mirror right now, and obviously we don't want this to be a perfect mirror because that doesn't look like water at all, because there's always some disturbance in water. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to do that with a displacement. So I'm not going to add roughness to it at all. I do want to adjust the IOR because the IOR of water is 1.3. It's not going to make a huge difference, but just do it. And now I'm going to give it displacement, but in order to give it real displacement, it needs real geometry. So I could give it a subdivision surface modifier, go on simple, crank this to like 5 or so, both viewport and render. And the other way is, if you don't want to do that because it can slow down the computer, it will slow down the computer either way, but if you want to give it a real geometry, let's turn this off for now, just tab, go in edit mode, right click, subdivide this like a lot of times, like 50 times or so. That is basically going to do the same thing. But the good thing about the modifiers is that you are working indestructibly. So that means that you can change those values all the time. When I click away now, it's done. It has all those subdivisions and I can't minimize it anymore. Well, you can, but it's a complicated process. So what I recommend to you doing is work with the subdivision surface first and see if that works. Now, this still doesn't look like water at all. So what we need to do is give it another node, a displacement node. So Shift A, type in displacement, and plug this into displacement. Still not gonna do anything because now we need to add some randomness into it. And the way we're gonna do that is hold Shift A and give it a noise texture. Now, if we plug this into the height, now we see something is happening suddenly. See, this is the water we're working with right now. So now we can play with those values a little. Like the first thing I do is I just increase the scale until I like this a little better. So for like an ocean like that, something like this would be good. So this is like the size of the scale. Now we can add a little more detail or less detail, just play around. And I always recommend have a reference image always next to you, like this one for example, so you see kind of what that water looks like. So that's what we're trying to imitate. So you can go through all those settings here and try to make it look like that water. And one thing you might notice is you like the shape of the water, but you just don't like how high it gets. So now you can just adjust the scale here, go a little lower on that so it minimizes the effect a little, and voila, that looks very good. So right now we have like Jesus walking on water. This is what it looks like in cycles. It always looks a little better. And with stuff like that, when you work with reflections and stuff like that and maybe haze, you always want to turn fast GI approximation. You want to turn this off because it might look better that way. So now you could have like camera movement zooming over the water or something like that. Could look awesome, but what we're gonna do is, because this water is like very stagnant right now because it's not moving at all, and a way to make this move is you go on your noise texture, click on 3D, and you want it to be 4D. Nothing is going to change yet, but what we're going to get is the W value, and with the W value we can just basically change its seat over time. So now we're just going to go to the very first frame in our timeline here, a graph editor, hover over W, hit I on your keyboard. This is going to make a keyframe. You see this is a keyframe. Now we're just going to go to the last frame of your scene and adjust this value by as strong as you want. Usually I just start with 0.1, hover over W again, hit I. Now I have two keyframes. You can see them, they're easing into each other. I don't want that, so I hover over here, hit A. It's going to select both of them and hit T to get the keyframe interpolation modes. And instead of Bezier, I want linear. So now it's just like a line here. Now I can look at it. Let's look at it in Eevee, because then we can actually see what it looks like. And that looks very good. For the case it's too fast or too slow, what I like to do is I always hit normalize so I can always see my 2 points. So let's say I make this one, bring this down, it always snaps back, but it actually doesn't snap back, it just snaps back because I hit normalize. But what I just did was I moved this one, this keyframe closer to this one on the y-axis, and that means the difference is not as big anymore, so it's going to move slower. If I want to achieve the opposite, if I want it to move faster, I hit G, Y, bring it further up, even though nothing changes because again I'm in normalize. If I didn't do normalize, it would actually stay there. That's what the normalize thing is for. You click this on to make sure you always have your keyframes in the shot. And if this is the speed you like, then that's basically it. Now you can model it out a little, give it like a little more ground so you have more things to reflect. You can model a few pieces, whatever your little heart desires. In the same way I animated the water earlier, I can just animate the camera, have a little push in. Always feels good if the camera's pushing in. So I just grab the camera, animate the location on the first frame, and animate the y-axis. It's like slowly pushing in. Hit another eye, and obviously make it linear. So now the camera is slowly pushing in, and it looks all kinds of cinematic. So that's basically it. This is how you can make water in Blender very easily, and you can of course adjust those values the way you want. If it's like a bigger ocean, you can make the displacement bigger. If it's just a pool, you can use it for that. So it's very exciting what you can do with it. And the one reason why I like this effect so much is when you look at this scene, it just gives it so much more very easy detail. Because in this scene particularly, I mean, I didn't do much to it, but let's say I made like a whole city or anything like crazy, just by adding water in the foreground, I gave it so much extra detail. Like half of the frame is just water, but it looks so cool and realistic, and it just mirrors like the actual scene. And so it just gives you so much free detail very easily, because it takes like a minute or 2 minutes to set this up, and you just doubled your detail in your scene. So this is very cool. I love to do that. So if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and see you in the next video. Toodaloo.